Imagine a 10-year-old girl in duct-taped boots walks up to you and says, "I can heal your child." You'd laugh. Until the moment you see her do what doctors couldn't. That moment changes everything. It was a sharp, wind-bitten morning in the heart of the city. The kind of morning where the air feels like it carries a weight of stories untold. People move quickly, clutching coffee cups, scarves wrapped tightly around their necks, eyes focused on the day ahead. The streets hummed with that familiar urban rhythm. Taxi horns, hurried footsteps, and the occasional burst of laughter from strangers who still found reasons to smile. On the far corner of Ashbury and West 14th, a black luxury sedan rolled to a gentle stop in front of the towering glass facade of the Marlowe Plaza Hotel. The car, polished to a mirror finish, reflected the steel-gray sky above. From the back seat stepped a man whose very presence commanded attention. His coat was perfectly tailored, the leather gloves expensive, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks to an unspoken sentence. This was Mr. Leonard Hayes, millionaire entrepreneur, philanthropist in the public eye, and a man whose life, from the outside, appeared untouchable. But inside that car, still seated, was his world, his son Elijah. Elijah was 12 years old, his frame thin and fragile beneath layers of warm clothing. His eyes were large and intelligent, the kind that seemed to notice everything but rarely revealed what they felt. For the past year, those eyes had been set at a lower vantage point than most boys his age. Elijah had not stood on his own feet since the accident. It had been a stormy night on the bridge, a hit and run that shattered not just bones but the rhythm of an entire family's life. Doctors had tried, surgeries had failed, and every specialist had eventually spoken the same soft but devastating truth. He may never walk again. Leonard had spared no expense. He had flown Elijah to clinics overseas, hired the best physical therapists, invested in experimental treatments that promised more hope than science. Nothing had worked. And so, Leonard had begun to accept what he once could not imagine. His son's life, lived from the seat of a wheelchair. The doorman moved swiftly to open the car door for Elijah. But before he could, a voice cut through the cold air. "Sir, I can make your son walk again." It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was steady, almost matter-of-fact, as though the speaker believed the truth of it with every breath. Leonard turned, eyebrows drawn together in irritation. Another person looking to sell him a miracle. But what he saw made him stop in mid-motion. Standing a few feet away was a girl. No more than 16, maybe younger. Her skin was a rich, deep brown, glowing against the pale backdrop of winter. Her coat was thin and frayed at the cuffs, the zipper barely holding together. Her hair coiled tightly, peeked from beneath a knit hat that had clearly seen better days. Her shoes were mismatched. One sneaker, one cracked leather boot, both dusted with road salt. Everything about her spoke of hardship. Everything except her eyes. They were steady, unwavering, and entirely without fear. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was making a statement, as though she were talking about the sun rising tomorrow. Leonard's driver took a step forward, his voice low and protective. "Sir, should I move her along?" But Leonard raised a hand, his curiosity caught. "What did you say?" The girl didn't flinch. "I said I can make your son walk again." A few passers-by slowed their steps, sensing something unusual in the air. It wasn't every day that someone stopped a millionaire on the sidewalk with a claim like that. Leonard narrowed his eyes. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The girl shook her head. "Doesn't matter. I know who he is," she said, nodding toward Elijah. "And I know what I can do." Leonard's gaze flicked to his son, who was watching the girl with quiet curiosity. Elijah tilted his head, as if trying to place her, but his memory offered nothing. "Listen," Leonard began, his voice clipped. "I've had the best doctors in the world work with him. If they couldn't, they didn't have me," she interrupted. The words were simple, but there was something in her tone. An unshakable certainty that landed heavy in the cold air between them. For a moment, Leonard just stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or be offended. People lied. People scammed. People saw a wealthy man with a wounded child and thought of ways to make a quick dollar. But this girl, she didn't look like she wanted money. She looked like she wanted him to listen. Against his better judgment, he asked, "What exactly is it you think you can do?" Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something like it. "I can heal him." The word heal felt too big, too impossible. And yet she spoke it like it was just another Tuesday. The driver shifted impatiently. "Sir, we should." Leonard ignored him. "And how, exactly, would you do that?" She took a slow breath, her gaze never leaving Leonard's. "With my hands. With what my grandmother taught me. With what no hospital can give." Leonard almost scoffed, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Elijah's eyes had lit up for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was the weight of his own exhaustion after a year of disappointment. Or maybe it was that unshakable steadiness in her voice, like she was holding a truth she had no doubt about. Still, reason clawed at him. "And what would you want in return for this healing?" The girl's expression didn't change. Nothing, only the chance to try. Her words unsettled him. In his world, nothing came for free. Nothing. And yet here was a girl with nothing offering something beyond price. He glanced around. People were watching now. Hotel guests, pedestrians, a street vendor pretending to rearrange his cart, but listening closely. The image of a powerful black businessman being confronted by a young black girl with a claim of miracle-making was enough to freeze the morning. Leonard turned back to Elijah. His son's voice, quiet but clear, broke the silence. "Dad, let her try." It was the first time in months Elijah had asked for anything, and that, more than the girl's claim, more than the watching crowd, was the reason Leonard didn't walk away. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "You have 10 minutes. If you're lying." "I'm not," she said before he could finish. And for the first time that morning, Leonard wondered if, just maybe, she was telling the truth. Leonard's driver hesitated as if to protest, but the look in his employer's eyes silenced him. He opened the car door and stepped back. The girl moved forward slowly, not like someone who was intimidated, but like someone who knew she was walking into sacred territory. Her mismatched shoes scraped against the pavement, leaving faint traces of slush on the ground. "Where do we go?" she asked, glancing at Leonard, her tone almost casual. Leonard studied her for a moment longer, then gestured toward the hotel entrance. "Inside. We'll use one of the conference rooms." The doorman's brows furrowed, but he said nothing. Guests turned their heads as the odd trio passed through the grand glass doors. The millionaire in his flawless suit, his son in a wheelchair, and the ragged girl with the unshaken eyes. The lobby was a palace of polished marble and warm lighting. Chandeliers cast golden halos on the floor, and a scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. It was the kind of place that belonged to money, not to someone in cracked boots and frayed sleeves. Yet she walked with her chin slightly lifted, not gawking, not shrinking, just being. Leonard led them down a carpeted corridor to a small private meeting room. The walls were lined with bookshelves and framed photographs of important people shaking hands with more important people. He gestured toward the center of the room, where a long table gleamed under the light. She ignored the table and knelt on the floor in front of Elijah's chair. "Can you get down here?" she asked him directly, her voice softer now. Elijah looked up at his father. Leonard hesitated, but then gave a nod. The driver helped guide Elijah onto a thick rug. His legs were stiff, lifeless beneath him. The girl settled cross-legged in front of him and took off her hat. Her hair tumbled free, thick, coiled, beautiful. She rubbed her palms together slowly, as if warming them, but her eyes stayed fixed on Elijah's face. "My name's Amara," she said. "And you?" "Elijah." "Good name," she murmured, almost to herself. Her hands hovered just above his knees, close enough that he could feel the faint heat radiating from her skin. "Tell me, do you feel anything when I do this?" She brushed her fingertips lightly over his shin. Elijah shook his head. She nodded once, not disappointed. "We'll see." Leonard watched, arms crossed, trying not to betray the unease curling in his stomach. He'd seen charlatans before, people who claimed they could do the impossible. But there was no sales pitch here, no dramatic flourish, only quiet concentration. Amara began to hum. It was a low, steady vibration, like the deep hum of a cello string. The sound was almost hypnotic. She placed her palms on either side of Elijah's legs and closed her eyes. The hum grew softer, slower, almost like a lullaby. Elijah's gaze flickered between her face and his father's. He didn't know what to expect, but the warmth from her hands seemed to sink deeper than just his skin. "You've been carrying fear," she said suddenly, her eyes still closed. "It's in the muscles, even the ones that can't move. It's in the way you breathe." Leonard stiffened. "What are you talking about?" She opened her eyes and met his. When a body gets hurt, the pain isn't the only thing that stays. The body remembers what it felt like to be broken. It holds on to it. I have to teach it to let go. Leonard didn't answer. Her words were strange, but they held a kind of truth that made him uncomfortable. She turned back to Elijah. "I want you to think about standing, not trying, just remembering what it feels like to be on your feet. Imagine the weight in your heels, the ground holding you up." Elijah frowned slightly, concentrating. Minutes passed. The hum of the heating system filled the silence, and the faint sound of traffic bled in from far below. Leonard glanced at his watch, telling himself he would give her 5 more minutes before calling it off. Then Elijah gasped. It was small, just a quick intake of breath. But Leonard's eyes snapped to his son instantly. "What is it?" he asked. "I felt something," Elijah whispered. "Like a spark." Amara didn't react, as if this was exactly what she expected. "Good. Keep breathing." Leonard stepped closer, kneeling beside his son. "Where?" Elijah's hand moved toward his calf. "Here." Just for a second, Amara's voice was calm. "That's the body remembering. It's like waking up from a long sleep. You don't move all at once. You start small." For the next 10 minutes, she worked in silence, her hands steady, her hum like a soft thread weaving through the room. Every so often, Elijah's breath would hitch, and he'd murmur that he felt a flicker. Once in his foot, once in his thigh. When she finally leaned back, her face glistened with a thin sheen of sweat. "That's enough for today," she said. Leonard straightened, his heart caught between skepticism and a dangerous, rising hope. "So what now?" Amara pulled her hat back on. "Now you let him rest. And tomorrow, I come back." Leonard frowned. "Tomorrow?" She nodded. "Healing isn't a lightning strike. It's a sunrise. You don't see it all at once, but it's coming." The driver stepped forward. "Sir, this is..." Leonard cut him off. "Be quiet." His gaze stayed on Amara. "You'll be here at 9. Don't be late." She gave a short nod, then headed toward the door without looking back. Leonard watched her go, unease twisting in his chest. This could still be nothing more than coincidence. A trick of the mind, some fluke sensation Elijah was desperate to feel. But there had been something in his son's eyes, a brightness he hadn't seen since before the accident. As the door clicked shut, Elijah looked up at him. "Dad, I think she's real." Leonard didn't answer. He only placed a hand on his son's shoulder, staring at the closed door as if it might reveal the truth he wasn't ready to believe. The next morning, the city woke under a pale sun. its light spilling weakly between the glass towers. Leonard sat in the corner of the hotel's private lounge, a cup of coffee cooling untouched at his side. He had been awake most of the night, replaying yesterday's encounter over and over. There had been no scientific explanation for what happened. A spark in Elijah's legs, after months of nothing, wasn't something he could easily dismiss. But Leonard was a man who lived by proof, and proof took time. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened and Amara stepped in. She was wearing the same coat as yesterday, zipped high against the cold, but there was something different about her today. Her hair tucked neatly, her eyes carrying a quiet fire. "You're on time," Leonard said. "I said I would be." She glanced toward Elijah, who was already waiting on the rug. "You ready?" Elijah nodded eagerly. As she knelt, Leonard decided to test her. "Before you start," he said, "tell me something. Why are you here? Why this?" Her hands stilled on her lap. For a moment, her eyes darkened, as if he had brushed against an old wound. "Because someone once told me my hands were a gift," she said finally, "and I promised her I'd use them." "Your grandmother," Leonard guessed. Amara gave a small nod. "She was a midwife in Mississippi. People called her a healer, though not everyone meant it kindly. Some called her a witch. Some wouldn't let her touch them because of the color of her skin. But the people who trusted her," Amara paused, her voice softening, "they lived. They got better. She taught me everything before she passed." Leonard's jaw tightened. He had grown up hearing stories like that. Black women whose skill and knowledge were dismissed, ridiculed, even stolen, because the world decided they had no right to be believed. Amara's gaze flicked up to meet his. "You've had doctors tell you what's possible. I'm here to show you what's possible." Her words hung between them, carrying the weight of generations who had been told you can't and had proven we can. Without waiting for permission, she began. Her hands moved differently today. Firmer, more precise. She pressed into points along Elijah's calves, his knees, the base of his spine. Each time her fingers found a spot, Elijah's face would twitch, sometimes in surprise, sometimes in pain. "Tell me what you feel," she murmured. "It's like heat," Elijah whispered. "And buzzing. That's your nerves remembering," she said. "They're stubborn, but they're waking up." Leonard found himself leaning forward, his skepticism eroding with each passing minute. There was no showmanship here, no attempt to impress him or anyone else. Just quiet work, deliberate and patient. Half an hour in, Amara sat back. "All right, Elijah, we're going to try something today." Leonard straightened. "What kind of something?" Amara looked at him evenly. "I want him to stand." Leonard's breath caught. "He can't. Maybe not yesterday," she said. "But today's not yesterday." She helped Elijah shift until his legs were tucked under him. "We'll go slow. I'm right here." Elijah's hands pressed into the rug, his face tightening with effort. For a moment, nothing happened, just the familiar stillness of legs that wouldn't listen. Then, almost imperceptibly, his knees twitched. His heels pressed against the floor. Leonard's throat tightened. "Push," Amara whispered. "Don't think about walking. Think about lifting." Elijah gritted his teeth. Slowly, achingly slowly, his body began to rise. It was no more than a few inches, but for the first time in a year, his weight was on his feet. Leonard's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "All right," Amara said gently. "Back down." Elijah sank to the rug, panting, but grinning like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Dad, I did it." Leonard couldn't speak. He simply knelt and pulled his son into his arms, holding him tighter than he had in months. When he finally looked up, Amara was already standing, adjusting her coat. There was no triumph in her expression, only quiet certainty. "How?" Leonard asked, his voice hoarse. Amara shrugged slightly. "Your body knows how to heal. Sometimes it just needs someone to remind it. Leonard studied her. Do you know what this means? She met his gaze evenly. It means he's going to walk again. There was no arrogance in her tone, no hint of doubt. It was the same voice she'd used on the street yesterday. A voice that spoke truth as though it were as simple as breathing. But as she turned to leave, Leonard caught something else. A shadow in her expression, quickly masked. "You're not telling me everything," he said quietly. She paused at the door. "I'm telling you what matters." And then she was gone, leaving Leonard with a son who had stood for the first time in a year, and 1,000 questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. That night, after Elijah had fallen asleep, Leonard sat alone in the darkened room, scrolling through his phone. It didn't take long to find her. Amara Johnson, 16. No parents listed. Multiple reports from child services. A record of living in shelters, on and off the streets. And one more thing. A sealed juvenile file. Leonard stared at the screen, unease curling in his gut. Whatever her past held, it wasn't simple. And yet she was giving his son something no one else had been able to give. He closed the phone and leaned back, his mind a storm of gratitude, suspicion, and something else, something he couldn't yet name. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask her for the truth. Morning light poured into the hotel room like a quiet blessing. Leonard sat in his chair, elbows on his knees, watching Elijah eat breakfast. His son's movements were different now. Not walking yet, but sitting taller, legs shifting more naturally. Even the way he laughed had changed. There was a lightness in it that had been gone for so long. At 9 sharp, there was a knock. Amara stepped inside, removing her hat as she did. Today, her coat hung open, revealing a faded sweatshirt with the word Liberty barely visible across the chest. Her eyes met Leonard's briefly before moving to Elijah. "You ready?" she asked. "More than ready." Elijah grinned. As she knelt to begin, Leonard said quietly, "Before you start, I need to ask you something." Her hands stilled. "All right. I know about your record," he said plainly. "I know you've been in and out of shelters. I know there's a sealed juvenile case." She didn't flinch. "And you want to know if I'm dangerous." "I want to know the truth," Leonard said. Amara sat back on her heels. 2 years ago, I was living with my mom in a basement apartment. She got sick, real sick, but we didn't have insurance. I tried to help her myself, using what my grandmother taught me. The neighbors, they didn't like that. They called the police, said I was practicing medicine without a license, said I was hurting her. She died before they could even take her to the hospital. Her voice stayed even, but her hands trembled slightly. They put me in the system after that. I've been on my own ever since. Leonard felt a slow burn in his chest. Not anger at her, but at the world that could twist survival into a crime. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because people hear record and they stop hearing anything else," she said simply. "They see a black girl with no parents and decide who she is before she opens her mouth." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Elijah spoke, his young voice cutting through the tension. "She's the one making me better, Dad. That's who she is." Leonard met Amara's eyes. There it was again, that quiet, unshakable dignity. She had nothing, yet she carried herself like someone who refused to bow to the world's smallness. "All right," Leonard said finally. "Let's keep going." Amara nodded once, then turned her attention to Elijah. Her hands moved with purpose, pressing, stretching, coaxing life into muscles long dormant. Leonard watched, the weight of what he had learned settling into something deeper than trust, respect. Half an hour later, she sat back. "Elijah," she said softly, "I want you to stand for me." He positioned his hands on the rug, his legs bent beneath him. Amara placed her palms lightly on his hips. "Breathe. Remember yesterday. Feel your feet in the ground." Elijah closed his eyes. Slowly, shakily he rose. This time, he didn't stop at a few inches. His knees locked, his back straightened, and he was standing, really standing, his head almost level with hers. Leonard's breath caught in his throat. "Now," Amara whispered, "take one step." It was awkward, his legs trembling, but his right foot moved forward. Then his left. 2 steps. Then 3. When his legs gave out, Amara caught him gently, lowering him back to the rug. Elijah was laughing, breathless, tears streaking his cheeks. "I walked," he said, almost in disbelief. "Dad, I walked." Leonard was beside him in an instant, his own voice breaking. "Yes, you did. You did, son." He turned to Amara, searching for words big enough to hold what she had done. "You've given him back his life." She shook her head. "I didn't give him anything. I just showed him what was already his." The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with Elijah's soft laughter. Then Leonard said, "What's next for you, Amara?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Survive, I guess. Maybe help more people if I can." "Not maybe," Leonard said firmly. "You will. You're not going back to the streets." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not looking for charity. And I'm not offering it," Leonard replied. "I'm offering you a place, a chance to work, to be safe, to keep doing what you're meant to do. The world needs you, Amara." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. That afternoon, Leonard called in favors, real ones. He contacted lawyers to petition for the clearing of her juvenile record. He arranged for her to have a safe place to live, connected her with a community health clinic that would welcome her skills. Word of Elijah's recovery began to spread quietly at first. Whispers among hotel staff, murmurs from guests who had glimpsed him walking. But when Leonard finally told the story publicly, not about a miracle, but about a young black girl's gift, dignity, and persistence, it was met with something rare. People listened. Not because he was a millionaire, but because the truth had its own weight. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Leonard stood at the edge of a community center gym. Inside, children laughed and shouted as they practiced walking, stretching, and moving under Amara's careful guidance. She wore a new sweatshirt now, bright blue, but the same steady eyes. Elijah was among them, walking laps with a confidence that made Leonard's heart ache in the best way. Amara caught Leonard watching and gave him a small, knowing smile. It was the same smile, barely there, but full of quiet certainty, that had stopped him on the street that first day. And in that moment, Leonard understood something he had been too blind to see before. Dignity isn't given, and justice isn't a gift. They're fought for, held onto, and lived every day by people like Amara who refused to be unseen. She had changed his son's life, but she had also changed his. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories just like this one. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts can create the biggest miracles. See you in the next video.